Honestly, I am just so literally drained by people like Brenda who think slapping a neon green laminated $250 fine notice on someone's front door is like a valid substitute for having an actual personality. Anyway, let's just dive right into the madness.
The heat in Scottsdale, Arizona doesn't just hit you, it disrespects you. It was mid-July, the kind of morning where the thermometer is already kissing 105 degrees by the time you've poured your first cup of coffee, and stepping outside feels like opening the door to an industrial kiln. I had lived in the Desert Bloom Estates for exactly 7 months, and for 6 of those months, I had been engaged in a low-level Cold War with the Homeowners Association. Actually, calling it a Cold War is a lie. It was a scorching, blistering, passive-aggressive war of attrition, and the commanding general of the enemy forces was a woman named Brenda. I swung my front door open, expecting nothing more than a blast of convection oven air and maybe a confused lizard on my welcome mat. Instead, my forehead nearly collided with a piece of violently bright, neon green paper. It had been taped to the wood at exactly eye level with what looked like industrial-grade packing tape. I peeled it off, taking a microscopic splinter of the faux mahogany finish with it, which honestly just set the tone for the entire day. It was a citation, a $250 fine. I stood there in my gym shorts, blinking against the blinding Arizona sun, and read the handwritten chicken scratch filling out the pre-printed lines. Violation, Section 4, Paragraph B, Subsection 9, Visible Refuse and Blight. Description: Residence waste receptacle was left exposed to the street, extending approximately 2 inches beyond the side yard concealment gate. This constitutes a visual disturbance to the community aesthetic. Trash is not an aesthetic. I looked to my left. There, sitting snugly against the stucco wall of my house, it was my standard-issue, city-provided blue recycling bin. It was pushed behind the slatted wooden gate that separated my side yard from the front driveway. But if you squatted down, angled your head at a precise 45-degree trajectory, and possessed the eyesight of a predatory hawk, you could see exactly 2 inches of the blue plastic wheel protruding past the wooden slat. 2 inches. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered to nobody, the hot air instantly drying out my throat. I didn't even go back inside for shoes. I marched down my driveway, the asphalt already searing the soles of my bare feet, scanning the immaculate, oppressively identical streetscape. Desert Bloom Estates was a neighborhood where every house was painted one of 3 approved shades of tan: Sahara sand, Tuscan dust, or sad oatmeal. Every yard featured exactly 1 Palo Verde tree and a geometrically perfect arrangement of crushed gravel. And there, 3 houses down, hovering like a vulture over a fresh carcass, was Brenda's customized golf cart. The cart was painted Sahara sand, to match her house, of course, and featured a little fringed canopy. Brenda herself was standing in the driveway of number 402, intensely measuring the height of a neighbor's agave plant with a retractable Stanley tape measure. "Brenda!" I shouted, the words scraping out of my dry throat. She paused, retracted the tape measure with a sharp snap, and turned slowly. She was wearing her standard uniform, crisp khaki capris, and a pastel pink polo shirt with the HOA crest embroidered on the breast, and a massive reflective sun visor that obscured the top half of her face. She looked like a heavily armored middle management cyborg. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine sweetness that usually precedes a threat. "I see you found my note." I found your extortion demand, I corrected, closing the distance between us. I waved the neon green paper in the air. 2 inches, Brenda? You cited me $250 because the wheel of my recycling bin was visible if you looked at it from a specific angle? Brenda sighed, a long theatrical exhalation, and adjusted the clipboard resting on her hip. The bylaws are the bylaws. We all agreed to them when we purchased property in Desert Bloom. But if we allow your refuse receptacle to breach the concealment barrier, where does it end? Next week, someone leaves an old mattress on the lawn. The week after that, we're living in a shanty town. It's a plastic wheel, I said, trying to keep my voice from echoing off the canyon of beige houses. It's not a mattress. It's the bin the city forces us to use. I pushed it behind the gate. Not far enough, she countered, tapping a perfectly manicured acrylic fingernail against her clipboard. The rules state, completely concealed from street view. It was not completely concealed. I took a photograph, for the records. You were on your hands and knees in my driveway at 6 in the morning taking pictures of my trash can? I was conducting a routine perimeter patrol, she said, lifting her chin. And it's a good thing I did. Your lack of attention to detail is dragging down the property values of the entire cul-de-sac. Trash isn't an aesthetic. It's a violation. The fine stands. You have 14 days to remit payment to the management company, or a late fee of $50 will be applied. I'm not paying this, I told her, stepping a little closer. The heat radiating off the asphalt was starting to bake my calves. Then a lien will be placed on your property, Brenda replied smoothly, as if she was reading from a teleprompter. It's nothing personal, it's just standards. Now, if you'll excuse me, the Henderson's gravel is looking a little sparse in Section 4. She turned, climbed into her fringed golf cart, and silently glided away on electric battery power. Tuts leaving me standing barefoot in the street, holding a $250 piece of green paper. I walked back to my house, the anger burning hotter than the pavement. I went straight to the kitchen, poured a massive glass of ice water, and sat down at the granite island. I wasn't just mad, I was obsessively, rigidly focused. This was the moment. I had let the warning for my overly vibrant patio cushions slide. I had paid the $50 fine when my garage door was left open for more than 30 minutes while I was actively unloading groceries. But this? 2 inches of a plastic wheel? This meant war. I walked into my home office, booted up my computer, and pulled up the PDF file I had saved on my desktop months ago. The Desert Bloom Estates Master Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, and all 142 pages of it. I spent the next 4 hours reading. I read through the mind-numbing regulations regarding the exact wattage of exterior light bulbs. I read the clauses dictating the specific species of drought-resistant shrubs permissible in front yards. I cross-referenced the trash concealment bylaws. Brenda was technically right. The wording was absolute. All waste, refuse, and recycling receptacles must be stored in a manner that renders them 100% invisible from any common area, sidewalk, or street. No exceptions. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. There had to be a flaw. These documents were written by lawyers paid by developers. They were dense, contradictory, and full of loopholes if you knew where to push. I started searching keywords. Exemptions, variances, modifications. Around hour 5, my eyes were crossing, but then I hit page 87. Article 9. Architectural Control and Aesthetic Standards. I was skimming past the rules prohibiting flagpoles and above-ground pools when a bolded subheading caught my eye. Section 12. Permanent Outdoor Art Installations. I stopped. I scrolled back up and began to read slowly, mouthing the words as I went. The association recognizes the value of cultural enrichment within the community. Therefore, residents may apply for a variance to the general aesthetic guidelines for the installation of permanent outdoor art. To qualify, the installation must be constructed of durable, permanent materials, for example, bronze, stone, sealed polymers, or welded steel, must be anchored or of sufficient weight to prevent displacement, and must be deemed a work of visual art intended to enhance the cultural fabric of the property. I stared at the screen. A slow, deeply cynical smile began to spread across my face. Sealed polymers. If I couldn't hide my trash from Brenda, I wasn't going to hide it at all. I was going to put it on display. I was going to make it immortal. I immediately grabbed my phone and started searching for industrial suppliers in the greater Phoenix area. I didn't need just a little craft epoxy. I needed volume. I needed the kind of chemicals used to build river tables or encapsulate electronics for deep-sea diving. 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with a guy named Viper. At least the website said his name was Viper, which seemed intense for a guy selling liquid plastic, but I wasn't judging. But his shop was located in an industrial park in Tempe, wedged between a discount tire center and a place that manufactured custom exhaust pipes. "Viper Custom Coatings," a gruff voice answered over the sound of a forklift beeping in the background. "Hey," I said, pacing around my living room. "I need deep pour epoxy resin, a lot of it. The UV-resistant, non-yellowing, crystal-clear stuff." "How deep a pour we talking?" Viper asked, sounding mildly bored. "You making a dining table with some live-edge walnut? I got kits for that, couple gallons." "No," I said. "I'm pouring blocks, solid cubes, 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches. The forklift stopped beeping. There was a pause on the line. "Bro, a cubic foot of pure epoxy? Do you have any idea the thermal mass on that? It's going to get hot enough to cook a steak while it cures. Yeah, you'll crack the whole block if you don't step pour it or use a slow-cure exothermic-controlled resin. What the hell are you casting?" "Trash," I said simply. "Say again?" "I am casting my household garbage, banana peels, empty soda cans, junk mail, used coffee filters. I want to suspend them in perfect crystal-clear cubes." Another long silence. "Are you a serial killer?" Viper asked, completely deadpan. "I'm an artist," I replied, feeling the sovereign justice persona clicking into place. "And I have a project that requires a significant volume of materials. Can you supply a slow-cure, high-clarity casting resin in bulk, or do I need to call someone in Los Angeles?" "Hold your horses, Picasso," Viper grumbled. "Yeah, I can supply it. I got 50-gallon drums of commercial-grade deep pour, 2-part system. It takes about 72 hours to fully cure per layer, stays clear as glass, UV stable, but it ain't cheap. You're looking at a few grand a drum." "Money isn't the object right now," I lied. It absolutely was the object. But I was willing to max out a credit card for the sheer, unadulterated spite of it. I need enough to cast roughly, let's say, 40 cubes. I'm building a retaining wall. Viper let out a low whistle. "A retaining wall made of garbage suspended in plastic. Man, I don't know what kind of drugs you're taking in Scottsdale, but I want some. Bring a heavy-duty truck. I'll get the forklift ready." The next 3 days were a blur of logistical chaos and noxious fumes. I rented a U-Haul box truck, drove down to Tempe, and loaded 2 massive heavy steel drums of Part A resin and Part B hardener into the back. Viper, who turned out to be a wiry guy in his 50s with a gray ponytail and a shirt that said, "I breathe fumes for fun," gave me a crash course in exothermic reactions. "You mix it wrong. It boils, smokes, and turns yellow," he warned me, slapping the side of a drum. "You gotta pour it in layers. 2 inches at a time. Let it gel, then pour the next. You put wet stuff in there, like your banana peels. The moisture is going to cause micro bubbles. You need to desiccate the organic matter first, or seal it with a spray clear coat before you sink it. Got it, I said, taking furious notes on my phone. Seal the trash, layer the pour, control the heat. And wear a respirator, man. Seriously. This stuff will coat your lungs. I drove back to Desert Bloom Estates like a man on a mission from a very petty, very vindictive god, while I pulled the U-Haul right into my driveway, ignoring the curtains twitching across the street. I spent the rest of the afternoon clearing out half of my 2-car garage, laying down heavy-duty plastic tarps, and setting up a makeshift laboratory. I ordered a dozen heavy-duty silicone cube molds from an industrial baking supply company online, paying exorbitant overnight shipping fees. Then, the real work began. The casting session. I didn't just want this to be a pile of junk. It had to meet the legal definition of art. It needed composition. It needed intent. I went through my house and began curating my waste. I dug through the recycling bin that had earned me the fine, pulling out crushed LaCroix cans, flattened Amazon Prime boxes, and empty milk jugs. I went through my kitchen trash, salvaging eggshells, a plastic clamshell that used to hold spinach, and the foil wrapper from a burrito. To deal with the moisture issue Viper warned me about, I spent an entire Saturday using my oven on the lowest setting as a makeshift dehydrator, drying out orange peels and apple cores until they were leathery and devoid of water. I laid everything out on folding tables in the garage, categorizing my garbage by color and texture. By Sunday evening, the silicone molds had arrived. I suited up in a full-face 3M respirator, thick nitrile gloves, and an old pair of coveralls. I looked like I was cooking meth, which in a neighborhood like Desert Bloom would probably carry a smaller fine than visible trash. I mixed the first batch. The resin was thick, like cold syrup. I poured a 1-inch base layer into the bottom of 12 molds and let them sit overnight to get tacky. The next morning, the magic happened. I took a crushed, vivid blue aluminum can, suspended it with a pair of tweezers over the center of the first mold, and carefully poured the next layer of liquid plastic around it. In the second mold, I arranged a spiral of junk mail, specifically a stack of HOA newsletters I had hoarded, fanning them out so the words community standards were visible through the clear liquid. In a third, I created a chaotic jumble of dehydrated coffee grounds and broken glass from a dropped wine bottle. The process was excruciatingly slow. Because of the heat generated by the curing resin, I could only add a couple of inches of depth per day. My garage became a sauna of chemical smells and humming box fans. Every night after work, I'd put on the respirator, mix another bucket, and carefully arrange more garbage into the rising, clear blocks. I treated each piece of trash with the reverence of a museum curator handling ancient artifacts. A squashed toothpaste tube was positioned just so. A tangled clump of old charging cables was spread out like a metallic jellyfish. After a week, the first 12 cubes were finished. I peeled the silicone molds away, and I have to admit, I was genuinely stunned by the result. They were beautiful. In a deeply perverse, post-apocalyptic way, they were genuinely stunning. The resin had cured crystal clear, devoid of bubbles thanks to my meticulous layering and a handheld blowtorch I used to pop surface tension. The trash inside was frozen in time, magnified slightly by the refraction of the plastic. The crushed blue can looked like a pop art sculpture. The floating junk mail looked like a commentary on modern bureaucracy, They weighed about 60 pounds each, solid, indestructible blocks of defiance. I carried the first 12 blocks out to my front yard under the cover of darkness. I had mapped out a curved line along the edge of the crushed gravel, right where a flower bed would naturally go. I began to stack them. Because they were perfectly uniform, they stacked like giant, transparent Lego bricks. I spent the next 3 weeks operating like a machine. Work, cast resin, dry trash, sleep, pour, cure, demold, stack. The U-Haul drums of chemicals slowly emptied. The retaining wall slowly grew. It was 2 feet high, then 3. It curved gracefully along my driveway, a glistening, one transparent rampart showcasing every single piece of garbage my household had produced over the last month. When the Arizona sun hit the wall in the late afternoon, it caught the aluminum cans, the glass shards, and the metallic foil wrappers, throwing fractured, colorful light across the beige stucco of my house. I had been live streaming snippets of the process on the Sovereign Justice YouTube channel, framing it as a tutorial on compliance engineering. The audience was eating it up. The views on the shorts were climbing into the millions. People were invested in the trash wall. It was only a matter of time before the empire struck back. It happened on a Tuesday. I was out in the front yard, using a heavy-duty construction adhesive to permanently bind the top row of cubes to the layers beneath them. So I was effectively making the wall a single, immovable monolith. I heard the whine of the electric motor before I saw her. Brenda's golf cart screeched to a halt at the edge of my driveway. She didn't even bother parking properly. She just left it angled half in the street. She marched toward me, her clipboard trembling in her hand. But she wasn't alone this time. Trailing behind her, looking incredibly uncomfortable in his dark blue uniform under the blazing sun, was a Scottsdale police officer. "Halt!" Brenda screamed, actually pointing a finger at me like a spellcasting wizard. "Stop what you are doing immediately!" I calmly set down my caulking gun, wiped my hands on a rag, and turned to face them. "Morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Officer, what can I do for you folks?" The officer, a young guy with a sunburned neck and a nameplate that read Miller, hooked his thumbs into his duty belt and looked at the gleaming, transparent wall of garbage. He blinked a few times, leaning in close to inspect a cube that contained a perfectly preserved half-eaten slice of pepperoni pizza suspended in plastic. "Sir," Officer Miller said, his voice hesitant, "we received a call from the HOA president regarding the illegal storage of hazardous waste and public dumping on your property." "Hazardous waste?" I echoed, feigning shock. I pressed a hand to my chest. "Officer, I assure you, there is no hazardous waste here. I am simply landscaping." "You are storing raw, untreated garbage in the front yard," Brenda shrieked, her composure completely shattering. She gestured wildly at the wall. "Look at it. Wuss, there are eggshells, there is a beer bottle, there is an old sneaker in that one." "Correction, Brenda," I said, stepping up to the wall and patting the smooth, glass-like surface of the top cube. "I am not storing garbage. I have permanently encapsulated mixed media in a non-biodegradable UV-stable polymer resin. These items are completely inert. They emit no odor, they attract no pests, and they cannot decompose. Biologically and legally speaking, they are no longer refuse." "It's trash!" she yelled, her face turning the color of the pizza sauce in the plastic. "You are building a wall out of trash." "I am installing a permanent outdoor art exhibition," I countered, keeping my voice utterly level. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out a folded copy of the HOA bylaws, and handed it to Officer Miller. I had highlighted the relevant section in bright yellow. "Officer, If you would direct your attention to Article 9, Section 12 of the Community Covenants. Miller unfolded the paper, squinting in the sunlight. He read it silently, his lips moving slightly. He looked up at me, then down at the paper, then over at Brenda. It says here, residents can install permanent outdoor art if it's made of sealed polymers and anchored to the property. Miller read aloud. Exactly, I said, smiling warmly. This is a sealed polymer. I am gluing it to a subterranean concrete footer I poured last weekend. It is permanently anchored. It is art. It is not art, Brenda screamed, stomping her foot on the asphalt. Art is a bronze statue of a heron. Art is a tasteful stone fountain. A squashed milk jug is not art. I turned to Brenda. One was dropping the friendly neighbor act and locking eyes with her. Art, Brenda, is subjective. And more importantly, the bylaws, which you hold so sacred, do not define what constitutes visual art. They only define the materials required. I have met the material requirements. I have met the anchoring requirements. Therefore, this is a permitted installation. Officer Miller cleared his throat, looking distinctly like a man who wanted to be literally anywhere else on earth. Ma'am, he said to Brenda, handing her back the paper. He makes a point. It's solid plastic. It's not leaking. It's not a health code violation. The city code defines illegal dumping as loose refuse that poses a sanitation risk. This is, well, it's basically a giant paperweight. I can't cite him for a health violation. You have to arrest him, Brenda demanded, rounding on the cop. He is vandalizing the neighborhood. He is destroying our property values. I can't arrest a man for gluing plastic blocks together on his own property, ma'am. This is a civil dispute. It's between him and the HOA. Miller tipped his hat to me, practically fleeing toward his patrol cruiser. You folks have a good day. Try to stay hydrated. Brenda stood there, vibrating with rage as the cruiser pulled away. She stared at the wall, then at me. You think you're clever, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you found a loophole. I am the president of the Architectural Review Committee. I am convening an emergency session tonight. We will pass an immediate injunction. We will bring in a bulldozer and crush these hideous things into dust. And we will bill you for the demolition. I picked up my caulking gun again, giving it a test squeeze. You can certainly try, Brenda, I said softly. But before you rent heavy machinery, I strongly suggest your HOA legal counsel brushes up on federal law, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106A. She paused, her eyes narrowing. What is that? The Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, I replied, savoring every single syllable. You see, Brenda, my channel online has over 2 million subscribers. They have been watching me build this piece. They have critiqued it, shared it, and celebrated it. In the eyes of the law, this installation has achieved recognized stature. And under VARA, it is a federal offense to intentionally distort, mutilate, or destroy a work of visual art of recognized stature without the artist's express written consent. I smiled, a wide, predatory grin that I knew would haunt her dreams. So, I concluded, if you or anyone you hire touches my wall, I won't be arguing with you in front of the HOA board. I will be suing you, personally, in federal court for statutory damages. Have a lovely afternoon. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at the wall, the sunlight catching the crushed blue can, refracting through the clear resin, and for the first time since I moved in, she had absolutely nothing to say. She turned on her heel, marched to her golf cart, and sped away, leaving tire marks on my driveway. I went back to gluing my cubes. The war wasn't over. In fact, the siege was just beginning. But as I set the final block into place, a cube containing the neon green $250 fine notice, perfectly preserved in the center. I knew I had the high ground. The next 48 hours were, honestly, some of the most productive and unhinged days of my entire life. Once you realize you're legally insulated by federal copyright law, a bizarre kind of peace washes over you. It's like, you know that feeling when you finally figure out how to beat a really difficult boss in a video game because you found the one spot on the map where their attacks can't reach you? Yeah, it felt exactly like that, except the boss was a 50-something woman in khaki capris, and the safe spot was a giant, shimmering barricade of encased garbage. As soon as Brenda's golf cart disappeared around the corner of Sahara sand-colored houses, I didn't go inside to rest. I went inside to set up my camera gear. If Sovereign Justice was going to capitalize on this, I needed to turn the heat up. I dragged my heavy tripod out onto the searing asphalt of my driveway, mounted my best 4K camera, hooked up a wireless lapel mic to my shirt, and went live. I literally just hit the button and started broadcasting the curing process of the final resin block. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by the internet's reaction, but I mean, within 20 minutes I had 40,000 people watching me sit in a lawn chair next to a wall of trash, drinking a lukewarm diet soda. "All right, sovereign citizens," I said to the lens, leaning forward so the lapel mic wouldn't catch too much of the wind whipping across the desert gravel. "For those of you just joining the stream, let me give you the quick rundown. What the Architectural Review Committee of Desert Bloom Estates, led by a woman who I am legally obligated to refer to only as the president, but who we all know is named Brenda, has declared war on my recycling bin. She cited me $250 because 2 inches of plastic were visible from the street. So, I took the community guidelines, which graciously allow for permanent outdoor art installations made of sealed polymers, and I maliciously complied. I grabbed the camera off the tripod and went handheld, doing a slow, dramatic panning shot of the resin rampart. The afternoon sun was hitting it perfectly now. It genuinely looked like some kind of avant-garde exhibit you'd see in a pop-up gallery in downtown Los Angeles, assuming that gallery was funded entirely by spite. "We have 36 cubes of pure, unadulterated household waste," I narrated, tapping the solid plastic with my knuckles. It made a satisfying, dense thunk sound. "Suspended in commercial-grade, UV-stable epoxy. We've got the crushed La Croix pamplemousse exhibit. We've got the dehydrated banana peel installation. And my personal favorite, right here in the center, the original $250 citation, encased forever like a mosquito, in Jurassic Park amber." The live chat was moving so fast on my monitor, it looked like a waterfall of text. People were losing their minds. I was getting super chats of $5, $10, $50 a pop. "This is literally the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," wrote user XX_HOA_Slayer_XX. "Brenda is going to need a tactical strike to take that down," chimed in someone named Legal Eagle Fan 99. "Bro, I am a law student in NY. Please tell me you're going to invoke VARA," read a $20 donation message. I grinned, pointing a finger directly at the camera lens. "To the law student in the chat, you get a gold star for the day. That is exactly where this is heading. Because honestly, I know Brenda. I know how these micro-dictators operate. She isn't going to just let this sit here. She's going to convene her little shadow council. They're going to print out some official-looking documents, and they are going to try to bulldoze my masterpiece. And when they do, we are going to drop the hammer of the United States federal government on them. I spent the next 3 hours streaming, mostly just hanging out by the wall, answering questions from the chat, and occasionally waving aggressively at the neighbors who were driving by at roughly 2 miles an hour, and their faces pressed against the glass of their SUVs, trying to figure out if I had finally lost my mind. The hammer drop, or rather the initial skirmish of the legal siege, arrived exactly 2 days later. It was a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, editing the VOD of the live stream to post as a condensed video, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly ding-dong. It was 3 sharp, aggressive bursts, followed by heavy knocking. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Standing on my porch, looking incredibly irritated and sweating profusely in the already 80-degree morning heat, was a guy holding a thick manila envelope and a clipboard. He was wearing a polo shirt with a local courier service logo on it. I opened the door, a steaming mug of coffee in my hand. "Morning. Hot one out there today." "Uh-huh." "Sign here," the courier grunted, shoving the clipboard toward my chest. He didn't even look up. He just wanted to get back into the air conditioning of his unmarked white van. I scribbled a completely illegible loop on the signature line, took the envelope, and shut the door. The envelope was heavy. Like, weirdly heavy. I took it over to the kitchen counter and sliced it open with a paring knife. Inside was a stack of paper that felt like it was printed on premium, heavy bond cardstock. It was literally the kind of paper you use for wedding invitations, which honestly just told me everything I needed to know about how much money this HOA was wasting on administrative intimidation tactics. At the top of the first page, printed in an aggressively large, bold serif font, were the words, "Cease and desist order and notice of intent to remediate." I set my coffee down, pulled out my phone, and immediately started recording. "All right, guys, sovereign justice update," I said, flipping the camera to show the document. "We got mail, and it's not a postcard from Brenda's vacation. Let's read this together, shall we?" I cleared my throat, adopting my most pompous, exaggerated legal voice. "To the homeowner of record, Desert Bloom Estates, Lot 42. You are hereby formally notified that you are in gross, intentional, and malicious violation of the Master Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, specifically your unauthorized construction of a wall composed of toxic, hazardous, and aesthetically offensive refuse constitutes a severe blight on the community." I paused, looking up at the camera. Was my eyebrows raised? Toxic? Hazardous? Guys, it's a plastic clamshell that used to hold organic baby spinach, glued inside a solid block of cured resin. The only thing toxic around here is the passive aggression. I kept reading. It was a masterpiece of legal posturing. The letter, drafted by some law firm in downtown Phoenix that probably charged the HOA $500 an hour, went on for 6 pages. It cited safety codes that didn't apply, zoning ordinances that had nothing to do with residential landscaping, and even vaguely threatened to report me to the Environmental Protection Agency. But the real meat of the document was on page 5. Demand is hereby made that you immediately cease any further construction, modification, or addition to this unauthorized structure. Furthermore, but you are given 72 hours from the receipt of this notice to completely dismantle, remove, and properly dispose of the offending structure at your own expense. Failure to comply with this demand will result in the association exercising its right of self-help remediation. The association will hire licensed contractors to enter your property, forcibly remove the blight, and all costs, including but not limited to demolition, disposal, landscaping repair, and legal fees, will be assessed directly to your property ledger as a special assessment lien. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. Self-help remediation, I repeated to the camera. I love that phrase. It sounds like they're going to send Brenda over here with a self-help book and a sledgehammer to work through her childhood trauma on my front lawn. But what they're actually saying is, they're going to hire a guy with a bulldozer to smash my art. I slapped the document down on the granite counter. This is it, guys. This is the exact moment we've been waiting for. They have officially put in writing their intent to destroy the Resin rampart, which means it is time to formally introduce them to my good friend, Vera. I spent the next hour drafting my response. I didn't hire a lawyer. Honestly, hiring a lawyer at this stage ruins the fun of malicious compliance. You want them to think they are dealing with an eccentric idiot right up until the moment the trap snaps shut on their leg. I opened a blank Word document and typed out a formal, polite, and devastatingly lethal reply. I didn't use heavy cardstock. I used standard, cheap printer paper, just to prove a point. Welcome to the Desert Bloom Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors and their legal counsel. I am in receipt of your cease and desist notice dated July 18th. I respectfully decline your demand to remove the permanent outdoor art installation currently situated on my property. As previously demonstrated to local law enforcement, the installation fully complies with Article 9, Section 12 of the Community Bylaws regarding permanent outdoor art constructed of sealed polymers. More importantly, I must inform you that this specific installation, titled The Suburbs Lament, has been heavily documented, serialized, and broadcasted to a global audience of over 2 million verified viewers. It has been reviewed, critiqued, and celebrated in digital public forums. Therefore, it has achieved recognized stature under the definitions established by federal law. I draw your attention to Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106A, known as the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, VARA. Under VARA, the author of a work of visual art of recognized stature holds the moral right to prevent any intentional distortion, mutilation, or other modification of that work. Furthermore, the law explicitly prohibits the destruction of a work of recognized stature, and any intentional or grossly negligent destruction of that work is a violation of federal law. Should you, your agents, your employees, or any contractor hired by your association set foot on my property and lay a single finger on the Suburbs Lament with the intent to damage, dismantle, or destroy it, I will immediately file suit against the association, whilst the individual board members and the contracted demolition company in the United States District Court for the District of Arizona. I will seek maximum statutory damages, which under the Copyright Act can reach up to $150,000 per infringement, plus full coverage of all my legal fees. I strongly advise you to consult with a copyright specialist before you make a $150,000 mistake over a visible recycling bin wheel. Sincerely, the artist. I printed it out, signed it with a flourish, drove to the post office, and sent it via certified return receipt mail directly to the law firm and to Brenda's home address. Then I went to a local hardware store, bought 4 high-intensity solar-powered LED landscape spotlights, and installed them in the crushed gravel at the base of the wall. When the sun went down that night, guess the Resin rampart didn't just sit in the dark. It glowed. It was brilliantly, obnoxiously illuminated, throwing harsh, weird shadows of suspended garbage across the street directly into the front windows of the neighboring houses. I pulled a lawn chair out onto my driveway, ordered a massive, extra-large meat lover's pizza, and sat in the hot night air, eating a slice while watching the curtains twitch in the house across the street. I knew Brenda's neighborhood watch goons were observing me. I wanted them to observe me. I wanted them to know I wasn't scared. I was comfortable. I was literally eating pizza in the warm glow of my federally protected trash. The 72-hour deadline from their demand letter came and went. Nothing happened. The weekend passed in a tense, simmering standoff. I checked my security cameras obsessively. I made sure my camera batteries were fully charged. I knew they weren't going to just back down. Brenda had too much pride, and the HOA board had too much collective narcissism to admit defeat to a guy who made YouTube videos for a living. They were going to call my bluff, assuming I was just throwing legal jargon around to scare them. They thought I was playing chicken. They didn't realize I was driving a tank. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, right at 7 a.m., the exact minute the city noise ordinances allowed for heavy construction equipment to begin operating. I was actually asleep when it started. I had stayed up late the night before, editing footage and monitoring the channel's analytics, which were absolutely skyrocketing. The sound didn't just wake me up. It rattled my teeth. It was the deep, guttural, rhythmic thumping of a massive diesel engine, accompanied by the high-pitched mechanical whine of hydraulics. I threw off my sheets, vaulted out of bed, and ran to the front window. I ripped the blinds open. Parked parallel to the curb, completely blocking my driveway and half of the street, was a massive, battered Ford F450 flatbed truck. Attached to the back of it was a heavy-duty transport trailer, and sitting on that trailer was a Bobcat skid-steer loader equipped with a terrifyingly large, jagged steel grappling bucket. Standing on the sidewalk, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly tired, was a guy wearing a faded neon orange high-visibility vest over a sweat-stained gray t-shirt. He had a thick, graying beard, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and a lit cigarette dangling from his lower lip. And he looked like a guy who had been doing demolition work in the Arizona sun for 30 years and had precisely 0 patience left for any nonsense. And parked safely across the street, about 50 yards down, partially obscured by a Palo Verde tree, was Brenda's fringed golf cart. She was sitting in it, holding a pair of compact binoculars to her eyes, watching the show. "Oh, it is so on," I whispered to myself. I didn't bother getting dressed properly. Honestly, the optics of confronting a demolition crew in a bathrobe were too good to pass up for the channel. I threw on a plush, dark blue terry cloth bathrobe over my boxers, slid my feet into a pair of brightly colored tropical flip-flops, and grabbed my phone. I hit record, held it up at chest level, and walked out my front door. The blast of morning heat hit me instantly, but I barely registered it. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under my flip-flops. The guy in the high-vis vest was unchaining the Bobcat from the trailer. The heavy steel chains clanked and rattled over the roar of the idling diesel truck. He didn't even notice me until I was standing about 10 feet away from him. "Morning!" I yelled over the noise of the engine. He jumped slightly, dropping a heavy chain binder onto the metal deck of the trailer with a loud clang. He spun around, took one look at my bathrobe, the flip-flops, and the phone pointed at him, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and flicked the ash onto the street. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice gravelly and loud to carry over the engine. "I don't want any trouble. I just got a work order. Management company called me yesterday. Said there's an unauthorized structure that needs demo and haul away. Standard blight removal. I got the paperwork right here." He tapped the clipboard hanging off his belt. I smiled, adopting my most disarming, friendly persona. I completely understand, man. You're just here to do a job. I'm not mad at you. I'm Gazer, by the way. I didn't offer my hand, mostly because I was holding my phone in one hand and keeping my bathrobe closed with the other. What's your name? Gary, he grunted, looking at me suspiciously. From Gary's Demo and Hall. Now, look, I gotta get this machine off the trailer. They're paying me by the hour, and I got another job in Mesa at noon. Gary, I said, taking a step closer, projecting my voice clearly so the phone microphone would pick it up over the diesel rumble. But I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I am about to save you a tremendous amount of money and a massive legal headache. Did the management company, or the HOA president over there in the golf cart hiding behind the tree, tell you exactly what you are supposed to be demolishing today? Gary frowned, looking past me toward the house. His eyes landed on the resin rampart. In the morning light, it was glittering. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. The cigarette hung motionless between his fingers. What in the actual hell is that? He finally asked, his voice dropping an octave. Is that garbage? Inside of glass? It is 36 individual blocks of commercial-grade polymer resin, I explained cheerfully. It is permanently adhered to a concrete foundation, and most importantly, Gary, it is a federally recognized work of visual art. Gary slowly turned his head to look at me, his expression a mixture of profound confusion and rising annoyance. Buddy, I don't care if it's the Mona Lisa made out of used diapers. The work order says Demo and Hall. The HOA has a lien right. They say you refuse to take it down, so they hired me. I run the machine, I crunch it up, I throw it in a dump fee pile, and I go home. He turned back to the trailer and reached for the release lever on the Bobcat's ramp. Gary, stop, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, sharp and authoritative. I wasn't smiling anymore. I dropped the friendly neighbor act and shifted straight into sovereign justice mode. If you drop that ramp, if you track that machine onto my property, and if that steel bucket touches even 1 millimeter of that plastic, yes, I am going to sue you, not the HOA, you personally, and your business, and your insurance company. Gary froze, his hand hovering over the lever. He looked back at me, his jaw tightening. You can't sue me for doing a contracted job, pal. I'm an agent of the HOA right now. They indemnified me. Did you read the indemnification clause in your contract, Gary? Because I guarantee you it covers standard civil liability. It covers you if you accidentally run over my sprinkler head. It does not cover you for committing a federal offense. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so he had to lean in to hear me over the truck engine. I want you to pull out your phone, Gary. Right now. I want you to Google the acronym VARA. Visual Artists' Rights Act. It is Title 17, Section 106A of the United States Code. Gary just stared at me. I ain't Googling nothing, man. I'm a demolition contractor, not a lawyer. Then let me summarize it for you, I said rapidly, pointing at the wall. That wall has been viewed by 2 million people online. It has achieved recognized stature under federal copyright law. VARA makes it a strict liability federal offense to intentionally destroy a work of visual art of recognized stature. Strict liability, Gary. That means it doesn't matter if you didn't know it was art. It doesn't matter if the HOA told you to do it. The person who physically commits the destruction is liable for statutory damages. Do you know what the statutory damages are for willful infringement under the Copyright Act? Gary didn't answer. He was looking at the wall again, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was looking at how solid those blocks were. He was doing the math on how hard his machine would have to work to break them. And now he was doing the mental math on my legal threats. It's $150,000, Gary, I said, leaning in. per infringement. And I will argue that each of those 36 blocks is an individual infringement. That's over $5 million in federal damages. Is the HOA paying you $5 million today? They're paying me $600 for the haul away, Gary muttered, his voice barely audible over the diesel engine. $600, I repeated, nodding sympathetically. I actually felt a little bad for the guy. He was just a pawn in Brenda's psychotic chess game. Gary, look at me. Look at my face. Do I look like a guy who is bluffing? I am standing in my driveway in a bathrobe. I am broadcasting this entire interaction to an audience of thousands of people, explicitly warning you of your federal liability. If you touch that wall, your business is gone. Your truck is gone. Your skid steer is gone. The HOA is using you as a human shield because I sent them a cease and desist warning them about VARA 3 days ago, and they were too cowardly to do it themselves. Gary's face flushed red, not from the heat, but from a sudden, dawning realization of anger. He looked down the street, spotting Brenda's golf cart partially hidden behind the tree. They knew about this? Gary asked, pointing a calloused finger down the street. They knew this was some kind of legal trap? I sent it certified mail to the management company and the board president, I confirmed. They have the tracking receipts, and they knew exactly what this was. And they hired you anyway, hoping you'd take the fall before I could get an injunction. Gary took a long, slow drag from his cigarette, exhaled a massive cloud of gray smoke into the hot Arizona air, and then flicked the butt onto my driveway. You know what? Gary said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I ain't getting paid enough for this kind of suburban high-tax bracket nonsense. He turned around, grabbed the heavy chain binder, and threw it back onto the deck of the trailer. He walked past me, pulling a bulky smartphone out of his pocket, and hit a number on speed dial. I kept my phone recording, panning it slightly to keep Gary in frame, while also capturing the front of my house and the Resin rampart. Yeah, Diane, it's Gary, he barked into the phone. Cancel the Desert Bloom job. Yeah, that's the whole thing. The work order is garbage. The HOA lied to us. The guy's got some kind of federally protected plastic monument out here, and they tried to use me as a crash test dummy to knock it down. Bill them for the dispatch fee. Bill them for 2 hours of my time. And tell them if they ever send me a contract like this again, I'm calling the Better Business Bureau. He hung up, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He looked at me, giving me a curt nod. You're a crazy son of a bitch, bathrobe guy. But you know your stuff. Nice wall. Thanks, Gary, I said, genuinely grinning now. Stay hydrated out there. Yeah, whatever. Gary climbed up into the cab of the massive F450. He slammed the door, the sound echoing off the stucco houses. He revved the massive diesel engine, and a thick plume of black smoke erupting from the exhaust stack. Here is the thing about driving a heavy-duty truck with a 30-foot equipment trailer attached to it. You need a lot of turning radius. Desert Bloom Estates was not designed for industrial logistics. It was designed for compact SUVs and golf carts. Gary was clearly agitated. He was running late for his Mesa job. He had just wasted his morning, and he was thoroughly annoyed at the HOA. He threw the truck into drive, cut the steering wheel hard to the left, and gunned the engine to pull away from the curb. He misjudged the swing of the trailer. The heavy steel axles of the transport trailer hopped the curb on the opposite side of the street. Specifically, they hopped the curb directly in front of house number 402, Brenda's house. I watched, holding my breath, as the heavy, dual-wheeled tires of the trailer dragged across the impeccably manicured expanse of Brenda's front yard. The tires plowed straight through a bed of imported, drought-resistant lantana, churning the soil and crushed gravel into a messy rut. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was the prize-winning, perfectly spherical, 4-foot-tall golden barrel cactus that Brenda had strategically placed near the edge of her driveway. It was her pride and joy. She had practically bragged about it in the community newsletter. The rear corner of Gary's steel trailer caught the side of the cactus. It didn't just knock it over. The momentum of the heavy machinery literally uprooted the massive, spiky sphere, rolling it across the driveway and violently crushing it against the base of her pristine Sahara sand stucco mailbox pillar. Green, our pulpy cactus flesh and heavy spines exploded across the concrete. Gary didn't stop. He probably didn't even feel the impact in the cab of that massive truck. He just straightened out the wheel and roared down the street, leaving a trail of diesel exhaust and horticultural devastation in his wake. I slowly lowered my phone. The street was suddenly quiet again, save for the hum of central air conditioning units. Down the block, Brenda's golf cart slowly crept out from behind the Palo Verde tree. She drove it down the street at a snail's pace, her eyes locked on the carnage in her front yard. She pulled up to her driveway and stopped. She stepped out of the cart, staring at the deep tire ruts in her gravel and the crushed, pulpy remains of her prize cactus smearing her mailbox pillar. She stood perfectly still for about 10 seconds. Then she slowly turned her head and looked across the street, directly at me. I was standing in my driveway, still wearing my bathrobe, bathed in the morning sunlight, standing next to my pristine, untouched, perfectly legal 36-block retaining wall of suspended garbage. I raised my hand, gave her a small, polite wave, and then turned around and walked back inside my house to make a fresh pot of coffee. The physical demolition attempt had failed spectacularly. The legal siege had held the line. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the end of the skirmishes. The final battle, the showdown where I would systematically dismantle the HOA's authority in front of the entire community, was still to come. And I needed to go buy a tuxedo. Honestly, walking into a strip mall tuxedo rental shop in Scottsdale when it's 110 degrees outside is a profoundly unnatural experience. I mean, the human body is just not meant to wear worsted wool when the asphalt in the parking lot is actively melting your shoe rubber. But I had a vision, and in the world of sovereign justice, you literally dress for the job you want, and the job I wanted was suburban warlord. The guy at the rental place, a teenager named Kyle, whose name tag was crooked, asked me if I was going to a summer wedding. I told him I was attending a surrender ceremony. He just sort of blinked, handed me a garment bag, and charged my card. The summons had arrived taped to my front door that afternoon, right next to the spot where Brenda's original neon green citation had been affixed exactly 30 days ago. So it wasn't a fine this time. It was a formal, aggressively worded Notice of Emergency Board meeting. It stated that my presence was demanded at the Desert Bloom Estates Community Clubhouse at 7 p.m. on Thursday to address the ongoing structural and legal crisis on Lot 42. They called it a crisis. I called it a masterpiece. I spent Thursday afternoon preparing my documentation. I didn't just print it out. I went to a premium office supply store. I bought the heaviest, most expensive ivory cardstock they sold. I bought leather-bound presentation folders. I had everything professionally bound with those little clear plastic covers and the thick black spines. If the HOA wanted to wage a war of administrative intimidation, I was going to out-bureaucrat them so hard their heads would spin. At 6:45 p.m., I took a shower, shaved, and put on the tuxedo. It was a classic peak lapel black tux with a crisp white shirt and a perfectly tied black bow tie. I looked like I was either going to the Oscars or about to testify in front of a congressional committee. I grabbed my leather-bound folders, locked my front door, and walked down my driveway, past the glowing, immaculate resin rampart, and headed toward the clubhouse. The Desert Bloom Estates Community Clubhouse was a deeply depressing building. It was basically a giant beige stucco rectangle that smelled permanently of concentrated pool chlorine, stale generic brand coffee, and decaying dreams. As I walked through the double glass doors, the blast of overtaxed air conditioning hit me. The main recreation room had been rearranged into a makeshift tribunal. At the far end of the room, but a long folding table was draped with a cheap plastic tablecloth. Sitting behind it were the 5 members of the HOA Board of Directors. And right in the center, flanked by her sycophants, was Brenda. She looked terrible. I actually felt a tiny, microscopic twinge of pity for about half a second. She wasn't wearing her usual crisp polo shirt. She was wearing a wrinkled blouse, and she had a massive, angry red stress rash crawling up her neck from her collarbone. The destruction of her prize golden barrel cactus by a fleeing, terrified demolition contractor had clearly taken a severe toll on her psyche. Sitting to Brenda's immediate right was a guy I had never seen before. He was wearing a slightly ill-fitting gray suit, sweating profusely despite the AC, and aggressively organizing a stack of manila folders. That, I guessed, was the HOA's legal counsel, the $500 an hour guy. The rest of the room was packed. They had set up about 50 metal folding chairs, and every single one was full. Neighbors were standing in the back, leaning against the walls. The neighborhood gossip mill had clearly been working overtime. Everyone wanted to see the guy with the garbage wall get publicly executed by the board. The room went dead silent as I walked down the center aisle. 50 heads turned to stare at me. I kept my posture perfectly straight, letting the absurdity of the tuxedo do the heavy lifting. I walked right up to the front row, which was completely empty, and took a seat directly in the center, perfectly aligned with Brenda. I casually crossed my legs, placed my leather-bound folders on my lap, and smiled at her. Brenda glared at me with the intensity of a dying sun. She grabbed a wooden gavel. She actually brought a real, physical wooden gavel to a neighborhood meeting and slammed it down on the plastic folding table so hard the water pitchers rattled. "This emergency session of the Desert Bloom Estates Homeowners Association is now called to order," Brenda announced, her voice practically vibrating with rage. She didn't even bother reading the minutes from the last meeting. She pointed her gavel directly at my chest. "We are here to address the blatant, malicious, and illegal actions of the resident at Lot 42, who has turned our community into a toxic dumping ground and engaged in acts of domestic sabotage against board members." "Point of order, Madam President," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. I didn't stand up, and I just leaned back in my chair. "Are we skipping the roll call and the financial report, or are we just abandoning Robert's Rules of Order entirely because you're having a bad week?" A few people in the back of the room murmured. Somebody actually chuckled. Brenda's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. "You do not have the floor. You will speak when spoken to." She turned to the sweaty guy in the gray suit. "Mr. Peterson, please read the charges." Mr. Peterson, the lawyer, stood up. He cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He looked at me in the tuxedo, then down at his notes. "Yes, well, the board is seeking an immediate, binding injunction against the resident of Lot 42 for the unauthorized construction of a solid waste retaining wall. Furthermore, the board is seeking compensatory damages for the emotional distress and property damage caused by the resident's, contractor interference." I laughed. I literally threw my head back and laughed out loud. The sound echoed off the drop-ceiling tiles. Contractor interference? I said, standing up and unbuttoning my tuxedo jacket. Mr. Peterson, is it? Are you referring to the demolition contractor that the HOA illegally hired to destroy federally protected artwork, who then accidentally ran over Brenda's cactus while fleeing in terror from the liability you exposed him to? It is not art, Brenda shrieked, half standing out of her chair. It is trash. It is literal garbage in plastic. Mr. Peterson, I said, ignoring Brenda completely and walking right up to the folding table. I picked up one of my heavy or leather-bound folders and slid it across the plastic tablecloth until it hit the lawyer's water glass. I suggest you open that, because I am frankly appalled that a licensed attorney in the state of Arizona would allow his clients to walk face first into a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit. Peterson blinked, looking down at the folder. He slowly opened it. Inside that binder, I projected, making sure the entire room could hear me, you will find a certified structural engineering report confirming that my installation is a permanent anchored structure made of sealed polymers, exactly as permitted by Article 9, Section 12 of the Community Bylaws. You will also find a printed analytics report from YouTube. Peterson's eyes widened as he flipped the thick cardstock pages. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, I continued, turned to pacing slowly in front of the board. The live stream documentation of The Suburbs Lament has surpassed 3.5 million verified views. It has been featured on 3 major art blogs, a prominent legal commentary channel, and the front page of Reddit. It is, by every conceivable legal metric, a work of visual art of recognized stature. I stopped pacing and leaned over the table, bracing my hands on the cheap plastic, getting my face about 2 feet away from Peterson's sweating forehead. So, counselor, I said, dropping my voice to a sharp, quiet edge. I want you to tell your client, on the record, in front of all these witnesses, what happens under the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990 if she hires another bulldozer to touch my property. Peterson swallowed hard. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at Brenda's purple face. He looked out at the 50 neighbors staring at him. He knew exactly what VARA was. Any lawyer worth their salt knows you don't mess with federal copyright statutes unless you want to lose your house. Brenda, Peterson whispered, leaning over to her. He didn't cover his microphone properly, so the entire room heard him. He's right. If we destroy it, the statutory damages are $150,000 per block. He has 36 blocks. We can't touch it. The HOA doesn't have the insurance coverage for a $5.4 million federal judgment. We'd bankrupt the entire community. A collective gasp went up from the folding chairs. The Hendersons, who lived 3 doors down from me, practically leaped out of their seats. $5 million? Mr. Henderson yelled, his face pale. Are you insane, Brenda? You're going to bankrupt the neighborhood over a recycling bin? Order! Brenda screamed, banging her gavel frantically. I am the president. I say what goes in this neighborhood. Actually, Brenda, federal law says what goes, I corrected smoothly, stepping back and buttoning my jacket. You tried to use administrative bullying to extort $250 from me because 2 inches of a plastic wheel were visible. So I took your rules and I weaponized them. I built a monument to your pettiness and I made it legally indestructible. I hold all the cards. I have the high ground. I am the captain now. Brenda looked like she was going to have a stroke. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the gavel. It rolled off the table and hit the linoleum floor with a pathetic clatter. What do you want? She whispered, and the fight completely draining out of her. She looked broken. Just, what do you want to take it down? I smiled. The sovereign justice smile. I'm glad you asked, Brenda, I said. I picked up a second leather-bound folder from my chair and tossed it onto the table. I have prepared a settlement agreement. It's a very simple, two-part malicious compliance contract. I turned to face the crowd, playing to the audience both in the room and the invisible camera I'd be talking to later. Condition 1, I announced. The HOA will pay me an artistic relocation fee. Since you are forcing me to decommission a federally recognized work of art, I require compensation for the loss of my creative expression. The fee is exactly $24,000. $24,000? Brenda gasped. Kia, that's absurd. That is exactly 1 year of my mortgage payments, Brenda, plus the original $250 fine you tried to hit me with. You can pay it out of the Community Reserve Fund. Consider it an investment in neighborhood aesthetics. The lawyer, Peterson, was reading the settlement agreement furiously. Brenda, he hissed, it's cheaper than federal court. Pay him. Condition 2, I continued, holding up 2 fingers. The HOA bylaws regarding waste concealment will be immediately amended. Section 4, paragraph B, subsection 9 will be stricken from the record. Trash and recycling bins are now legally permitted to be visible from the street by a margin of up to, let's be generous, 5 full inches. I leaned in, making direct eye contact with Brenda. You sign this paper right now, in front of everyone? With a notary present, I said quietly. And I will hire a specialized hazmat and art removal team to safely dismantle the resin rampart by tomorrow afternoon. You refuse, and I will pour a second layer of concrete, add 30 more blocks, and declare it a historical landmark. The silence in the clubhouse was absolute. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. 50 pairs of eyes watched Brenda. She looked at the paperwork. She looked at the lawyer, who just nodded grimly. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling. Slowly, painfully, like a woman signing away her soul, Brenda picked up a pen from the table. She flipped to the signature page of my heavily bonded, ridiculously dramatic settlement agreement, and she signed her name. The room erupted. It wasn't cheers, exactly, but it was a massive release of tension. People were whispering, shaking their heads, getting out of their chairs. I didn't stick around to chat. I picked up my empty folder, turned on my heel, and walked out of the clubhouse, the tails of my rented tuxedo jacket swishing behind me. I walked out into the oppressive Arizona night, the heat immediately suffocating the cool AC air, and I felt nothing but pure, unadulterated triumph. The next morning, the teardown began. I didn't hire Gary the demolition guy. I hired a specialized fine arts moving company from Phoenix. They showed up with a climate-controlled box truck, a team of guys wearing white cotton gloves, and a crane. I live-streamed the entire decommissioning process. It took them 6 hours to carefully break the industrial adhesive seal between the blocks, to wrap each 60-pound cube of suspended garbage in moving blankets, and load them onto pallets. The HOA had already wired the $24,000 to my escrow account. I had literally forced my homeowners association to pay my mortgage for a year because they couldn't handle a recycling bin. But I didn't let them take everything. I kept one piece. Later that afternoon, after the truck had driven away, and my driveway was completely clear save for a faint outline of construction adhesive on the crushed gravel, I walked down the street to house number 402. Brenda's yard was a disaster zone. The deep tire ruts from Gary's truck were still there, and the smashed remains of the golden barrel cactus were drying out in the sun. I walked up to her front door and rang the bell. She answered a few moments later, peering through the crack of the door. When she saw it was me, she immediately tried to slam it shut, but I stuck my foot in the jamb. "Relax, Brenda," I said. holding up my hands. "I come in peace. The wall is gone. The contract is fulfilled. I just brought you a parting gift." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a perfect, flawless 4x4-inch cube of clear polymer resin. Suspended perfectly in the center of the block was the original neon green, laminated $250 fine notice she had taped to my door. I had spent all night polishing the cube with compound so it shined like a diamond. I handed it to her. She instinctively took it, her hand sagging slightly under the unexpected weight of the solid plastic. "What is this?" she mumbled, looking down at her own handwriting trapped inside the acrylic prison. It's a paperweight," I said smoothly. "For your desk at the Architectural Review Committee. I thought you might want a physical reminder of the time you tried to play God over 2 inches of plastic and ended up funding my retirement account instead." She just stared at it, her mouth opening and closing silently like a landed fish. "Justice isn't blind, Brenda," I said, stepping back off her porch. "She just prefers her trash in a high-gloss finish. Have a beautiful day." I walked back to my house, leaving her standing in the doorway holding the heaviest mistake she had ever made. That night, I filmed the final outro for the Sovereign Justice YouTube channel. I set up my camera in my home office, wearing my signature black t-shirt, completely dropping the tuxedo aesthetic. "Honestly, guys," I said to the lens, leaning back in my chair, this whole saga just proves the absolute core thesis of malicious compliance. Bureaucracy is a weapon. Homeowners associations, local ordinances, corporate policies, they are designed to crush the individual. They rely on the fact that you will be too tired, too intimidated, or too uneducated to fight back. They rely on you just paying the fine to make the headache go away. But the moment you actually read the rule book," I continued, pointing a finger at the camera, "the moment you realize that the cage they put you in is made of paper, you can tear it down. We didn't just beat Brenda. We didn't just beat the Desert Bloom Estates, HOA. We used federal copyright law to turn household garbage into a multi-million-dollar liability shield. And we made them buy it from us to save themselves." I smiled, a genuine relaxed grin. The resin rampart is gone, but the precedent remains. The bylaws have been amended. The neighborhood is safe for recycling bins. And best of all," I paused for dramatic effect, leaning closer to the microphone, "the annual HOA board elections are next month. And after the absolute financial and public relations disaster Brenda just put the community through, the neighbors have been knocking on my door all afternoon. It seems they want a change in leadership. They want someone who actually understands the bylaws." I crossed my arms. "So, yeah, I guess I'm running for HOA president. Because if you can't beat the system from the outside, you might as well take the keys, lock the doors from the inside, and burn the rulebook to the ground. Have fun with this one. It's a ride." I reached forward and killed the recording. I sat in the quiet of my office for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, knowing that somewhere down the street, Brenda was looking at a block of plastic, realizing her reign of terror was officially over.